Okay, first of all, I know the history behind the WNBA. I know that both of those cities have had teams before and they got us where we're at, so I'm thankful.
What happens when a basketball player's simple complaint about referees turns into a full-scale war against an entire league? Sophie Cunningham just found out the hard way, and the WNBA's response has sent shockwaves through the basketball world that nobody saw coming. Picture this. You're watching your favorite team play, and you notice the refs making some questionable calls. You might complain to your friends, maybe post something on social media. But what if speaking that truth cost you thousands of dollars and put you in the crosshairs of league officials? That's exactly what happened to Sophie Cunningham. And her story is about to expose something much darker lurking beneath the surface of women's professional basketball. It all started innocently enough. Sophie, frustrated after watching yet another game filled with missed calls and questionable officiating decisions, did what millions of fans do every day. She posted her honest thoughts on TikTok. But unlike the rest of us, Sophie called the officials exactly what she thought they were: useless. Those 6 letters would change everything. Within hours, the WNBA hit her with a $500 fine that sent ripples of shock through players and fans alike. Most people would have learned their lesson, apologized, and moved on. But Sophie Cunningham isn't most people. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. Sophie took her frustrations to her podcast, where she didn't just defend her earlier comments, she expanded on them, revealing something the WNBA desperately didn't want the public to know. She exposed widespread dissatisfaction among players about the officiating standards that had been quietly festering for years. The league's response was swift and brutal, another $1,500 fine, bringing her total penalties to a staggering $2,000. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Instead of silencing Sophie, these fines did something the WNBA never expected. They turned her into a martyr. Social media exploded overnight. Hashtag supporting Sophie began trending worldwide as fans realized they weren't alone in their frustrations. The outrage wasn't just about the fines. It was about the glaring inconsistency in how the league handled different situations. While Sophie faced multiple penalties for speaking her truth, other players, including star Caitlin Clark, had endured brutal treatment on the court for 2 full seasons without a single fine being issued against those responsible. The contrast was impossible to ignore, and fans weren't having it. Within hours, GoFundMe campaigns appeared to cover Sophie's fines, reaching their goals almost instantly. Petitions demanding transparency in officiating gathered thousands of signatures in record time. The questions being asked were simple but damning. Why punish a player for speaking truth that everyone can see? Why ignore the cries for better accountability? The WNBA had inadvertently created exactly what they were trying to prevent: a movement. But to understand how we got here, you need to understand just how different the WNBA's approach is compared to other major basketball leagues. In the NBA, outspoken players like Draymond Green have built entire careers not just on their skills, but on their fearless honesty. Charles Barkley became a cultural icon precisely because he spoke his mind openly and unapologetically, challenging the game and its flaws. Fans don't just tolerate this kind of candor, they celebrate it. It's become part of basketball's identity. Sophie Cunningham's experience tells a completely different story. After she openly called out referees for failing to protect players, including Caitlin Clark, the response was chilling. A league official pulled her aside in front of her entire team and quietly warned her, "They're going to find you again." This wasn't just a simple reprimand. It was a clear message that the WNBA's tolerance for free speech has strict limits, and the consequences are steep. While the NBA operates with a culture of open dialogue, the WNBA seems to follow a much harsher playbook where speaking out carries heavy penalties. What the WNBA didn't anticipate was creating the perfect example of the Streisand effect, the phenomenon where attempts to suppress information only make it spread wider. By trying to silence Sophie Cunningham, they accomplished exactly the opposite. Her punishment amplified her voice and shined an even brighter spotlight on the very officiating issues she had exposed. The irony becomes even more striking when you consider the recent controversies involving unpunished cheap shots against players like Caitlin Clark. For over 2 years, fans have watched star players endure dangerous hits that would result in ejections in other leagues. yet these incidents have largely gone without significant consequences. Marina Mabrey's brutal blindside hit, DJ Carrington's near miss that could have seriously injured Clark's eye. These moments have become all too common. Meanwhile, when Sophie Cunningham simply points out that referees are failing to do their jobs, the WNBA suddenly becomes laser-focused on enforcing discipline. The priorities seem completely backwards, like watching someone ignore a raging fire in their house while obsessing over someone forgetting to use a coaster. The pattern that emerges is deeply troubling. Have you ever left a WNBA game feeling uneasy, like the contest wasn't quite fair? That lingering frustration is exactly what Sophie brought into the spotlight. While she openly acknowledges that refereeing is a challenging job, her real concern lies in the inconsistency that plagues the league's officiating. This isn't about a few missed calls here and there. It's about a systematic problem that affects how teams adjust their strategies, how fans react with mounting anger, and how players bottle up their frustrations after games. The recent incidents involving Caitlin Clark perfectly illustrate this problem. Star players frequently suffer cheap shots during games without a single whistle being blown. Questions flood social media and echo through arenas. Why do these fouls go unpunished? Why does the league appear to turn a blind eye? Veterans, rookies, and fans from coast to coast are all asking the same bewildering question. What's going on with the refs? Yet, instead of addressing these concerns, the league's response has been to slap fines on players brave enough to speak out. That $500 penalty might seem small to some, but it only added fuel to an already burning fire. Rather than calming tensions, these penalties transformed Sophie's story into something much bigger, a rallying cry for everyone who's been silently frustrated with the state of officiating in women's basketball. When you compare the WNBA's approach to other professional leagues, the difference becomes stark and concerning. Take the NFL, for example. Despite high-profile mistakes, like the infamous 2019 no-call in the Saints game, the league maintains a much stronger sense of accountability. NFL referees are viewed as professionals whose decisions are openly analyzed and discussed by fans, players, and media alike. Players can voice their frustrations about officiating without fear of punishment, and this openness actually builds trust even when mistakes happen. The WNBA seems to be taking the exact opposite route, one that focuses more on quieting critics than solving the underlying problems. Research confirms that poor officiating does far more damage than just affecting game outcomes. It erodes trust at a fundamental level. Fans start doubting the fairness and credibility of the entire league. Players grow hesitant to speak up, fearing fines and penalties that stifle honest conversation. This creates a destructive cycle where silence breeds more mistrust, potentially driving away the very fans and players the league depends on for survival and growth. What makes Sophie's situation even more surreal is the bureaucratic nightmare it became. Getting fined for discussing your own fines feels like something straight out of a Kafka novel. Sophie revealed on her podcast how her general manager pulled her aside right in front of her teammates to deliver news of yet another penalty. Despite acknowledging that some referees are skilled and that their job is incredibly difficult, her words still weren't enough to escape the league's strict punishment system. This reveals a fundamental breakdown in how problems are addressed. If referees were consistently making the right calls and maintaining proper order on the court, players like Sophie wouldn't feel compelled to publicly air their frustrations. The fact that this is happening reflects serious issues with officiating standards. Instead of taking the criticism seriously and working to improve, the league chose to ignore the concerns and double down on punishment, transforming what should have been a simple complaint into a much bigger controversy about free speech and the limits of league authority. The timing couldn't have been worse for the WNBA's reputation. Just as the Wall Street Journal published an opinion piece raising concerns about potential civil rights violations against Caitlin Clark, the league found itself under a microscope for creating what many see as a hostile environment where honest feedback is met with fines and intimidation. Media outlets began questioning whether the WNBA fosters a workplace where players feel safe to speak up about legitimate concerns. This isn't just about one player or one fine anymore. Fans have responded with predictable outrage, but it goes deeper than typical social media complaints. They see the disconnect between what the league claims to value and how it actually operates. people are offering to pay Sophie's fines, signing petitions for real officiating reform, and demanding transparency that goes far beyond surface-level changes. This represents deep frustration with leadership that seems more focused on controlling the narrative than addressing the fundamental issues that are driving players and fans away. The WNBA's handling of this entire situation threatens to alienate the very people who love the game most, both players and supporters. When you have a league that appears more willing to penalize honest words than dangerous actions on the court, serious questions arise about where priorities actually lie. Sophie's criticism wasn't inflammatory or disrespectful. No profanity, no personal attacks. Just simple truth that echoed what countless viewers were thinking. Yet the league's response wasn't an attempt to listen and improve, but rather an apparent effort to silence dissent. What's particularly damaging is how this approach stifles the authentic voices that could create stronger connections with fans. Leagues like the NBA thrive because outspoken personalities are encouraged to challenge norms and speak their minds. The WNBA's seen but not heard stance risks turning the sport into something bland and forgettable, exactly the opposite of what a growing league needs. Sophie's podcast brings energy and gives fans genuine insight into players' perspectives, yet the WNBA penalizes her every time she raises legitimate concerns. The message being sent is crystal clear. No criticism, no matter how fair or constructive, will be tolerated. This creates an environment where problems fester in silence until they become too big to ignore. The fallout from this controversy reveals why the WNBA continues to struggle for mainstream respect and recognition. When leadership focuses more energy on controlling player speech than improving the actual product, growth becomes nearly impossible. When the game itself is solid and fairly officiated, players don't feel the need to complain publicly. But with poor officiating creating ongoing frustration, no amount of fines will stop the truth from eventually spreading. Sophie Cunningham's story has evolved from a simple complaint about missed calls into something much larger, a symbol of a leadership crisis that prioritizes image management over real solutions. Until that fundamental approach changes, more controversies like this one will inevitably follow. The question now isn't whether the WNBA will face more criticism, but whether they'll finally choose to listen to it instead of trying to silence it with fines and threats. The basketball world is watching, and the WNBA's next move will determine whether this controversy becomes a catalyst for positive change or just another example of a league that chose control over growth. Sophie Cunningham may have started this fight with a simple TikTok video, but she sparked something that could reshape women's basketball forever.